Hello, this is Chuck Stevens, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the December 10th issue of the New York Times here on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. First story, Trump says Americans are doing great, even as views on the economy sour. President Trump's speech in Pennsylvania was meant to alleviate concerns about affordability, but he kept wandering off script and dwelling on his favorite targets, like immigration. President Trump on Tuesday night gave the first of a series of speeches intended to alleviate Americans' concerns about the cost of living, but spent most of the time mocking the term affordability and insisting that Americans were doing better than they had ever done before. Speaking to an enthusiastic group of supporters in a casino in Mount Pocono, Pennsylvania, Mr. Trump plunged immediately into the case that Americans, and Pennsylvanians in particular, were actually doing very well, gliding by the evidence about reduced spending power for the middle class. In the winding presentation that ran about 90 minutes, he episodically talked about economic initiatives, but also wandered into discussions of shutting down immigration, at one point comparing the country's sealed borders to North Korea's. He also boasted of saving U.S. steel, which was sold to Nippon Steel, the Japanese giant, last summer, under a deal that gave a golden share to the government and Mr. Trump an outsized voice in the running of the company. The president repeatedly confused slowing inflation down with bringing down prices, which would be deflation with its own risks. Our prices are coming down tremendously, he insisted, before wandering off topic. Later he said that inflation has stopped. His own Bureau of Labor Statistics indicated that as of September, inflation was running close to 3%, almost exactly where it was at the end of the Biden administration. Mr. Trump's political advisors are clearly concerned that merely telling voters they are doing well could repeat a mistake made by Mr. Trump's nemesis and predecessor, former President Joseph R. Biden Jr. Mr. Trump came armed with a raft of statistics carefully selected to make his case, and blamed Mr. Biden for leaving him the highest inflation in history. But then he acknowledged that Susie Wiles, his chief of staff, told him recently, "We have to start campaigning, sir." Inexplicably, the president called Ms. Wiles Susie Trump. Mr. Trump was supposed to focus entirely on the economy, but he often ignored the script flashing before him and returned over and over again to his favorite targets. He attacked transgender Americans, repeatedly blamed Mr. Biden for inflation and illegal immigration. "He's a sleepy son of a bitch who destroyed our country," he said, and roused the crowd by demanding that Representative Ilhan Omar, the Minnesota Democrat, leave the country. Later in the speech, he attacked electric cars and revived the call to drill, baby, drill. He praised himself for saving coal mining, even though coal mining jobs declined during his first term. He brought with him a number of cabinet members, including Chris Wright, the Energy Secretary, and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, whose predecessors usually avoided showing up at heavily partisan events. When Mr. Trump introduced Mr. Bessent, he did not talk about Mr. Bessent's economic initiatives, but instead said to applause he's in charge of the investigation of Somalia and the billions of dollars they have robbed from Minnesota. If they don't go to jail, Scott Bessent is toast, he later told the Treasury Secretary, laughing. Mr. Trump was not wrong about the scandal. Federal prosecutors have charged dozens of people with felonies, accusing them of stealing hundreds of millions of dollars from a government program designed to feed children during the COVID-19 pandemic. But the prosecutions were underway long before Mr. Trump seized on the topic. He raised the possibility, without evidence, that Mr. Biden signed the appointments of members of the Federal Reserve Board with an auto pen, suggesting that he may argue that they are not legally in their posts. "I'm hearing that an auto pen could have signed maybe all four, but maybe a couple of them will take two," he said to muted applause. Mr. Trump's performance raised a fundamental question. More than a year after he defeated Kamala Harris, who replaced Mr. Biden on the Democratic ticket, can he still blame his predecessor for all the nation's ills? As the evening wore on, he began to use increasingly dubious statistics, at one point saying that under Mr. Biden, 100% of new jobs were going to migrants, but that since I took office, 100% of all net job creation has gone to American citizens. Well, there are no government numbers that support his argument. As the evening wore on, Mr. Trump unleashed a list of other unsupported arguments, including repeating his argument that every boat full of suspected drug runners struck off the coast of Venezuela saves 25,000 lives in the United States. In closed testimony, military officials have acknowledged that most of the boats were going elsewhere in the region, including Suriname and ultimately to Africa or Europe. Now we're going to do land, he said, repeating for the second time in 2 days the threats to attack unspecified facilities inside Venezuela. Along the way, Mr. Trump praised Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth as young, strong, and smart. Mr. Trump sensed that he had drifted off topic, but decided to enjoy the moment. I haven't read practically anything off this stupid teleprompter, he said midway through his speech. Mr. Trump spoke not far from Luzerne County, a once solidly Democratic industrial manufacturing hub that swung hard toward Mr. Trump after voting twice for Barack Obama. Mr. Trump won the area 3 times by double digits, including 2020, when he defeated Joe Biden, who grew up in Scranton. But there are signs that Luzerne County is starting to swing back. Republicans, who a little more than 2 years ago owned 10 of the 11 seats on the county commission, now hold just 3, after Democrats swept 4 or 5 seats last month. Greg Buzinski, a salesman, and his wife, Edie, a nurse, raised 3 children near Wilkes-Barre on a combined $45,000 salary. Now the couple is struggling to stretch their retirement savings. Edie cuts out coupons to take grocery shopping, something she never used to do. Greg buys whatever beer is cheapest. Everything is climbing, Mr. Buzinski said. Utility bills are going up. The electric bill has gone up. Water bill has gone up. Rents and home prices are way too high. We don't see any break. For someone who campaigned on bringing down prices on day one, that obviously has not happened. He added of Mr. Trump, he comes up with plans that are grandiose and good, but we've seen the prices go up and stay up. No matter how many times he says different, we know the reality. Donna Benet, a tailor and a seamstress in the suburb of Kingston, recently went to buy a zipper from China on Amazon that she said normally costs $8 to $10. She was shocked to see a new sticker price of $24.99. She is debating whether to raise prices across the board. I don't want to, but everything is more expensive. Utilities, insurance, she said. Affordability is out of control. It's painful to go to the grocery store. I could stop eating, I suppose. She added, I'm offended that he finds the affordability crisis a hoax. He's probably never paid an electricity bill or shopped for groceries in his life. In some Trump updates from the New York Times, National Guard deployment, a federal judge said the Trump administration must end its deployment of California National Guard troops in L.A. The ruling said that the federal government had illegally kept troops in the city long after protests erupted this summer over immigration raids there. The order, which was stayed until Monday, requires the control of the troops returned to Governor Gavin Newsom. Of course, the Trump administration is expected to appeal. The ruling came from Judge Charles R. Breyer of the Federal District Court in San Francisco, applies to about 100 National Guard soldiers who remain in L.A. 6 months after protests erupted over immigration raids. Judge Breyer directed the federal government to return control of the troops to Governor Gavin Newsom of California, but he stayed his order until Monday. The Trump administration is expected to appeal. The founders designed our government to be a system of checks and balances, Judge Breyer wrote in his decision. Defendants, however, make clear that the only check they want is a blank one. President Trump originally called up about 4,000 California National Guard troops in June over the objections of state and local officials. At the time, he argued that they were responding to an emergency and were needed to protect federal property and personnel amid heated demonstrations. The president began gradually drawing down the number of federalized troops in July. As of last month, roughly 300 California National Guard members remained under the president's command. The administration was in the process of reducing the deployment to 100 troops who were supposed to remain federalized until February. Mr. Newsom sued over the initial deployment, but the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit ruled in June that conditions in Los Angeles were sufficient for Mr. Trump to take control of the state's National Guard and direct troops to protect the enforcement of immigration laws. The state filed a new request for an injunction in November, arguing that civil unrest in Los Angeles has declined significantly since the summer and that military forces were no longer justified. The president's authority to command National Guard troops is specifically tied to the existence of a present exigency, Megan Strong, a California Deputy Attorney General, argued in a hearing on Friday. Once that is passed, the federalization has to end, Strong said. Lawyers for the Trump administration argued that threats to federal immigration agents had persisted in Los Angeles, even as the summer's large street demonstrations subsided. They pointed to a man who was arrested last week after the authorities said he tried to firebomb a federal office building in Los Angeles. The lawyers also asserted that the law requires an emergency only at the time the president decides to federalize National Guard troops, after which he can extend the deployment as long as he deems necessary. It falls to the president's judgment to determine when that mission can end, said Eric J. Hamilton, a Deputy Assistant Attorney General at the Federal Department of Justice. During the hearing on Friday, Judge Breyer indicated that he agreed with California's interpretation of the law. No crisis lasts forever, he said. In his ruling, the judge said the Trump administration had failed to provide evidence of any circumstances in Los Angeles that were now impeding the enforcement of federal laws, a legal requirement for using the troops in the way Mr. Trump has done. Mr. Newsom's lawyers had asked the court to block future attempts by Mr. Trump to federalize California National Guard troops. Judge Breyer denied that request on Wednesday and said that the state could return to the district court to challenge any such attempts if they occur. Still, California's Democratic leaders celebrated the ruling. Mr. Newsom said he looked forward to the troops in Los Angeles returning to state service after Mr. Trump had deployed them against their own communities, removing them from essential public safety operations. Rob Bonta, the state's Attorney General, said the Trump administration had been playing political games with California's troop. But the president is not king, he said in a statement, and he cannot federalize the National Guard whenever, wherever, and for however long he wants without justification. This is a good day for our democracy and the strength of the rule of law. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times here on the Niagara Frontier radio reading service. Just a reminder, we're available on all major podcast platforms and, of course, on your smart speakers as well. So a judge grants the Justice Department's request to unseal Epstein's grand jury records. A judge on Wednesday granted the Justice Department's latest request to unseal records of the federal grand jury investigation into the convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein in the wake of a new law requiring the department to release all its Epstein files by December 19th. The decision by the judge, Richard M. Berman, of Federal District Court in Manhattan, came one day after another judge granted a similar request in the case of Ghislaine Maxwell, who had conspired with Mr. Epstein in his sex trafficking scheme. The two rulings could lead to the most expansive and revealing look yet at the federal investigations of Mr. Epstein and Ms. Maxwell. The judge's orders cover not only grand jury transcripts, but also a large trove of other investigative materials which were provided to defense lawyers in the discovery process and kept confidential for years under court protective orders. Judge Berman, in a 4-page order, said he was granting the government's motion in accordance with a new law, the Epstein Files Transparency Act, and with the unequivocal right of Epstein victims to have their identity and privacy protected. Clearly, victims' safety and privacy are paramount, Judge Berman added. The law, which was passed by Congress last month, requires that the materials be released with redactions to protect victims' names and other identifying information. This past summer, Judge Berman and Judge Paul A. Engelmayer, who is overseeing Ms. Maxwell's case, each denied a request made by Attorney General Pam Biondi for the Epstein and Maxwell grand jury materials, citing grand jury secrecy. In seeking the unsealing of the Epstein and Maxwell records last month, Ms. Biondi broadened her request to include the discovery materials kept secret under the court protective orders. She also asked the judges to expedite their rulings given the deadline set by the new law. Those requests, submitted by Ms. Biondi and her deputy Todd Blanche, were signed by Jay Clayton, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. Mr. Epstein was indicted on sex trafficking charges in July of 2019 in Federal District Court in Manhattan. He was found dead in his jail cell the following month while awaiting trial, and his death was ruled a suicide. Ms. Maxwell was convicted in December 2021 of sex trafficking conspiracy, sex trafficking a minor, and other counts. She is serving a 20-year prison sentence. Her conviction came after a month-long trial, during which prosecutors presented testimony and evidence portraying Ms. Maxwell as a sophisticated predator who had groomed vulnerable young women and girls as young as 14 years old for abuse by Mr. Epstein. Along with the grand jury transcripts, the judge's orders require the government to release discovery materials that have so far been kept secret. These include materials gathered from government searches of physical locations, like Mr. Epstein's house and island, as well as the contents of computers and other electronic devices seized by the authorities. They also include arrest reports and post-arrest statements, bank and other financial records, private airline passenger logs, and reports and notes from interviews with victims. The Epstein Files Transparency Act mandates that materials not be withheld, delayed, or redacted on the basis of embarrassment, reputational harm, political sensitivity, including to any governmental official, public figure, or foreign dignitary. In addition to protecting the privacy of victims, the new law allows for the redacting of records that would jeopardize an active federal investigation. Our next story from the New York Times. Miami voters elected Eileen Higgins as mayor in a rout on Tuesday, choosing a Democrat to lead the city for the first time in almost 30 years in a race that Democrats hope sets a precedent for the 2026 midterms. Ms. Higgins, 61, will become Miami's first female mayor and its first non-Hispanic mayor since the 1990s. Cuban-American Republicans have dominated city politics over the past 3 decades. Together, we turn the page on years of chaos and corruption and open the door to a new era for our city, one defined by ethical, accountable leadership that delivers real results for the people, Ms. Higgins said in a statement declaring victory, promising to lead a government that finally earns the public's trust. Voters signaled a desire for change. In the first round of the election in November, sending Ms. Higgins, a former Miami-Dade County Commissioner, and Emilio T. Gonzalez, a former Miami city manager, to Tuesday's runoff. Both candidates campaigned on good government platforms, following years of corruption scandals in a city controlled by political dynasties. Mr. Gonzalez publicly conceded on Tuesday evening, as unofficial results from the county election supervisor showed Ms. Higgins leading by 18 percentage points. The outgoing mayor, Francis X. Suarez, who briefly ran for president in 2024, is term limited. Mr. Gonzalez said in an interview that he was proud of building a grassroots campaign of volunteers after starting from scratch as a first-time candidate. I don't regret a thing, he said, adding that he had called Ms. Higgins and wished her the best as mayor. There might not have been an election this year without him. He won a lawsuit against the city after Mayor Suarez and several commissioners tried to postpone the mayoral election to November 2026. The move earned Mr. Gonzalez considerable goodwill from voters, though Ms. Higgins easily came first last month. Though Miami elections are technically nonpartisan, both major political parties were involved in the campaign. President Trump endorsed Mr. Gonzalez, and the Democratic National Committee helped Ms. Higgins. National Democrats flew in to campaign with her over the past few days, a striking development for a low turnout off-year election. Fewer than 37,000 votes were cast in the runoff. Miami, a city of about 500,000, is Florida's second largest by population after Jacksonville. Like the state, Miami has become more Republican over the last few election cycles, making a Democratic victory all the more striking. While Democrats slightly outnumber Republicans in the city by voter registration, Republicans have excelled at getting more of their voters to the polls. This year's election broke that pattern, which Democrats see as an indicator of rising discontent with Mr. Trump and his party. Though local elections can be imperfect in measuring the national mood or predicting whether congressional districts might also flip, national Democrats were quick to celebrate Ms. Higgins' resounding win. Hakeem Jeffries, the U.S. House Minority Leader, wrote on X that the party is coming for the 3 South Florida Republicans next. Until recently, Ms. Higgins, a mechanical engineer by training and a former Peace Corps director in Belize, represented what she characterized as a Republican-leaning district on the county commission. She was first elected in 2018 after introducing herself to voters as La Gringa. Her blowout victory on Tuesday showed that she had built a diverse coalition of voters that crossed ethnicities and party lines. Ms. Higgins' focus on competence and experience mirrored the campaign priorities of Daniela Levin Cava, a fellow non-Hispanic Democrat, who became Miami-Dade County's first female mayor in 2020. Ms. Levin Cava was reelected last year. The two women had the same political consultant, and Ms. Levin Cava, who remains popular, endorsed Ms. Higgins. Ms. Higgins has promised to focus on solving residents' problems if elected. "I'm a proud Democrat, but I serve them," she said of the broader electorate at a campaign stop last week. "If their streets are flooded, I want public works projects that stop the flooding. If they need affordable housing, I don't ask what political party they are before we let them take over an apartment they're in need." Next from the Times, a Cinnabon worker was fired for a racist slur. Her supporters have raised $130,000. When video of an argument between a white worker at a Cinnabon store and 2 black customers began to circulate online last week, it seemed to fall into a troubling but familiar genre. The employee at the northern Wisconsin shop can be heard calling the customers a racial slur and makes an obscene gesture. "I am racist," the worker declares. Cinnabon soon fired the worker, saying her actions and statements were completely unacceptable. But what happened next veered from the way many viral moments of outrage play out online. While many on social media condemned the worker's words, others leaped to her defense. And for at least the second time in recent months, donors offered money to someone caught being racist. By Tuesday, a campaign for the fired employee, who was not named by Cinnabon, had raised more than $130,000. That crowdfunding page is hosted on GiveSendGo, a website that says it aims to share the hope of Jesus through crowdfunding to everyone who comes to our platform. The person who created the page describes the former Cinnabon worker as a hard-working mother, adding that no white person should lose their job for refusing to be harassed by Somalians. Some who donated offered notes of encouragement to the woman, whom they saw as being singled out unfairly. They also promoted white supremacy and condemned illegal immigrants through the immigration status of the customer, although the immigration status of the customers was not clear. The woman believed to be the fired employee did not respond to requests for comment. In a statement, Alex Shipley, communications director for GiveSendGo, said that the company did not celebrate harmful speech, but was providing a space for expression. Our role is not to be a place of judgment, but to allow people to turn to their communities for support. A rival page on GoFundMe, created by a woman who said on that site that she was the cousin of one of the Somali customers, is seeking contributions to help the Somalis pursue legal action. It's raised about $6,400 so far. The person hosting that campaign did not respond to a request for a comment. GiveSendGo is also the platform for a crowdfunding page to raise money for a woman in Rochester, Minnesota, who called a child of Somali descent a racial epithet on a playground earlier this year. The incident was also recorded on video, and it appears to show the woman, Shiloh Hendricks, who was white, acknowledging that she used the slur. Ms. Hendricks was cited by the city in August for disorderly conduct in the incident. The prosecuting attorney said a court date was pending. The fundraising campaign for her has totaled more than $800,000. Ms. Hendricks' attorney, Brian Carless, said the incident was different than the one at Cinnabon. My client, in my opinion, was the victim in that case, despite her language, he said, adding that she was upset at the time because she thought the person filming was trying to instigate a fight. That's not the same, he said, as someone working in the customer service industry. You should treat the client with kindness even if they're rude, said Mr. Carless, who added that he thought the disorderly conduct complaint would be dismissed. It's unclear what started the confrontation at the Cinnabon in Wisconsin. It was a suburb of Green Bay, but the company said in a statement that the video was deeply troubling and that the employee was immediately terminated by the franchise owner. Jennifer Chuddy, an associate professor of political science at Wellesley College, said fundraising efforts like these reflect the conservative backlash to the nationwide protests about race that followed the 2020 killing of George Floyd. The political winds have changed so undeniably that these kinds of things can happen, and not only happen but receive validation, she said. Steve Hahn, a history professor at New York University, said that the funding campaigns show that viral videos and social media can be harnessed by people of varying political beliefs. The amazing thing about this is some of the ways in which social media transformed the whole landscape, Dr. Hahn said. We wouldn't know about so many of the brutal assaults on black men and women by the police and other law enforcement were it not for phone recordings. But social media also allows people to organize and financially support the politics of racial resentment, Dr. Hahn added. Some white people, he said, feel that they're the ones who've been discriminated against. Now they have platforms. Video of the slur directed at the Somali pair comes at a time when Somali immigrants have experienced increasingly anti-immigrant sentiment. Last week, President Trump went on a xenophobic tirade against Somali immigrants while launching a new ICE operation primarily targeting Somalis in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, saying he did not want them in the country. Dr. Chuddy said views expressed by officials about protecting one group of people and rejecting another can have a noticeable effect. There's a lot of political science research that suggests when elites say things, people follow, she said. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Have you downloaded our smart app for your smartphone yet? Available in both Google and Apple Play stores, and it is free and easy to operate. From the lifestyle section, is saturated fat actually good for you? Health experts have long recommended limiting it, but Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has signaled a shift in that advice. For decades, nutrition experts and health officials have warned eating too much saturated fat. Red meat, Full-fat dairy products, fried foods, and other big sources of the nutrient can raise your cholesterol, they have said, and with it the risk of cardiovascular disease. But Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and other federal health officials, along with some proponents of the Make America Healthy Again movement, have taken a different stance, suggesting that the fats have been unfairly demonized and that the evidence to prove that they are harmful is insufficient. Mr. Kennedy, the nation's health secretary, has been dismissive of expert consensus and said that the next edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, expected in early 2026, will stress the need to eat saturated fats. So why the potential about-face on decades of guidance? We asked nutrition experts to break down the evidence. So what are saturated fats? All fatty acids are categorized into two main groups, according to their molecular structures. Saturated fats, which tend to be solid at room temperature, are predominant in animal products like butter, cheese, beef, and pork, as well as certain oils like coconut oil and palm oil. Unsaturated fats are abundant in fish and foods like avocados, nuts, seeds, and cooking oils like olive oil and soybean oil. These types of fats tend to be liquid at room temperature. Since the 1950s and 60s, studies have consistently found cardiovascular benefits from limiting saturated fats, said Kevin Klatt, an assistant professor of nutritional sciences at the University of Toronto. Small clinical trials from the 1950s, for instance, found that when adults replaced saturated fats from foods like butter or coconut oil with unsaturated fats from sources like sunflower oil or corn oil, their blood cholesterol levels decreased. Other studies published around the same time found that those who consumed less saturated fat tended to have lower rates of coronary heart disease than those who consumed more. Based on this and other research, the American Heart Association began recommending in 1961 that adults at risk for heart disease replace saturated fats with unsaturated fats in their diets. Federal health officials issued similar guidance for everyone in the first edition of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans in 1980 and have recommended limiting saturated fats in subsequent editions. Studies performed during the decades since have continued to support this advice, said Deidre K. Tobias, an epidemiologist at Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston. In dozens of short-term clinical trials published since 1970, researchers have found that the more saturated fats people consume, the higher their blood levels of LDL or bad cholesterol rose. Over time, high LDL can raise the risk of having a heart attack or a stroke. The results of longer-term trials, while mixed, have largely shown that the more people reduce how much saturated fat they eat, the lower their risk of having a cardiovascular event like a heart attack or stroke. In observational studies that have followed large groups of adults for decades, researchers have also found that consuming less saturated fat and more unsaturated fat was linked to lower rates of both coronary heart disease and earlier death, Dr. Tobias said. Next up from Lifestyle, Judy Jupiter, a 76-year-old social media star, is Gen Z at heart. In the 1970s, she photographed Andy Warhol and Debbie Harry on wild nights at Studio 54. Now she's chronicling a new generation. On a brisk afternoon in Washington Square Park, a petite 76-year-old woman wearing Versace sunglasses and a hoodie studied the scene around her. She goes by Judy Jupiter. And as buskers strummed guitars and New York University students read books on benches, she was searching for something. "It's just a feeling," she said, "when I know I know." She spotted a tall young man wearing a red hoodie and Timberlands. She raced up to him, phone in hand, and started filming. "Oh, look at you," she said. She pelted him with questions. "What's your name? What's your Instagram? What do you do?" He said he was a 21-year-old model named Waylon Rose. Jupiter hit him with her signature question. "Want to do a spin for me?" He twirled for her with a catwalk flourish. I love those baggy pants, she said. You're Judy Jupiter, aren't you? He said. I recognize your voice from the videos. Your posts have been getting around. I guess I've been hoping one day I might run into you and that you'd stop me. Among the Instagram and TikTok set, Judy Jupiter has emerged as one of New York's most improbable chroniclers of downtown street style. With an approach that's one part Bill Cunningham and one part Studs Terkel, she has broken through the algorithm with her affable manner and borderline invasive curiosity. She's just as compelled by a model skater wearing Rick Owens as she is by a philosophy major in a thrift shop scarf. I love the Gen Zs, Jupiter said. I love their attitude. They think the world is in a bad place and that we've got to make it better. That's their thing. They're into making things better. I'm a Gen Z too, she added. I moved to New York from Detroit at the age of 24, and I'm still 24 in my head. So they're my people. The Gen Zs only like talking to people their own age. And since they can tell I'm like them, they talk to me. If someone looks over 30, I don't even interview them. They all saw my Sabrina Carpenter video, she continued. I still don't understand why I went viral. There's no answers. There's no 411. Jupiter's brush with Ms. Carpenter last summer brought legions of followers to her TikTok and Instagram accounts. The clip, which has netted millions of views, shows Jupiter interviewing the pop star as she walks through Soho with her entourage. The video's charm comes from the fact that Jupiter is unaware of who Ms. Carpenter is. Hi, how are you? What's your name? Sabrina, Ms. Carpenter replies. You look spectacular, Jupiter says. Her later street interviews with other young celebrities unknown to her, like Troye Sivan and Kyrie Irving, only added to her social media mystique. I never know who these people are, Jupiter said. I don't read the newspaper or follow the news. I cry when I read the news, so why would I? But I don't get starstruck. Back in the 70s, I met every celebrity there ever was at Studio 54, where I was a house photographer, so I don't get starstruck. As evening approached in Soho, she scanned the streets with darting eyes. Over 600,000 people are following me now, she said. It scares the hell out of me. How many are stalkers? I live alone. I don't have a dog. I don't have a gun. I got wasp spray. Crossing Houston Street, she talked about her interactions with Gen Z. Someone told me I need to heart more and comment back more to them, but I don't always understand their language. They call me a goat a lot. I don't know what it means. I always have to look up what they're saying on Google. Sometimes Google doesn't even know. I like them better as a generation than the millennials, she went on. The millennials stopped freedom of speech and got on guys for putting their arm on a girl. But I hear Gen Zs aren't having sex. I think lots of them also don't have jobs, because I interview most of them while they're just hanging out in the middle of the workday. But I'm not down on people having rich parents. It's nice to be taken care of. When she arrived outside the Brazier Baltzhauser, someone called out from the corner, Judy. It was a scrum of downtown content creators, and they were all hanging about, taking a break from filming. One of them, David Carmi, runs at Confidence Heist, in which he asks people what makes them confident. Another Preppy Pete runs the street style account at Gotham Galleria. Get anything good today? Jupiter asked. I got this one girl on Spring Street who gave me an amazing answer. When I asked what's her purpose, Mr. Carmi said. He broke away to approach someone with his microphone. Excuse me, miss, you look really confident. What's your secret? Afterward, Mr. Carmi considered Jupiter's entry to the content creator economy. Getting out here into the streets to make content, it's uncomfortable to start, he said. With Judy, she's especially targeting Gen Z, and I think she's showing people that by just approaching a stranger and asking them to do a spin, she's asking them to be themselves. Lately, Jupiter has started making money from her content. She gets requests from record labels to promote their artists, with staged versions of her whimsical street interviews, for which she charges up to $2,500. Her sponsored videos have included encounters with the rock artist Somber and the Greek pop star Konstantinos Arigos. I'm looking for an agent, she said. I want one of the top 3. I tried contacting William Morris, but they told me I needed referrals to be considered. She entered Balthazar, strutting past the hostesses. "Hi, girls," she said. She made her way past the bar, scouring for stylish characters. There in a red booth was the singer-songwriter Sam Smith, wearing an unbuttoned, wide-lapel shirt, having lunch with 2 friends. She started recording. "Sam, is this your first time here?" she asked. "Oh, I'm not doing interviews," Smith said. "I'm eating." "What's your Instagram?" she said. "Sam Smith." A Balthazar staff member approached and told Jupiter it was time to leave. Back outside, as she started walking to Chinatown, I asked if she felt rattled to be rejected by a celebrity. "No, because everyone's the same to me," she said. "I had a date once with Keith Richards. I saw it already." In the kitchen of her small apartment in a creaky walk-up in Little Italy, Jupiter reminisced about the 70s when she was a fixture at Studio 54. "I made him laugh," she said, gesturing toward a photo of herself with Andy Warhol at the fabled disco. There aren't many good pictures of Andy laughing. Judy Jupiter was born Judy Lynn DeLong in 1949 and grew up in Detroit as the daughter of a prosperous sheet metal engineer. As a teenager, she immersed herself in the Motown scene, sneaking out to the clubs where she saw the Temptations and Stevie Wonder. She hung out with mobsters in Greektown and shoplifted at malls to stifle her boredom. "I was born quick, competitive, ambitious, and with a great body. But I was also born in the Midwest," Jupiter said. "I'd go through 10 friends a day in my teens, burning them out, then picking up a new one. I was always bored growing up." At 24, she drove to New York with her 2 cats and a U-Haul truck. She got a job at Macy's, fell into the downtown punk scene, and began dating a CBGB's bartender. To help pay the rent, she did some nude modeling for Merrill Meisler, who became her photographic mentor. They documented Times Square with their cameras while working as waitresses in go-go bars and strip clubs. Some of their pictures appeared in the porn magazines Cherie and High Society. When Studio 54 opened, my hairdresser boyfriend told me it was going to be the hottest thing ever, Jupiter said. I believed him because hairdressers know everything in New York. She asked around and learned that Studio 54's public relations agency was Gifford Wallace. She visited its offices one afternoon and cold-pitched herself as a publicity photographer. They put her on the list along with Ms. Meisler, and the gig involved making the disco look as glamorous as possible. Studio 54 felt like the Roaring '20s when I got there, she said. It was a time when people still looked into each other's eyes. They didn't have a phone in their eyes. They had people in their eyes. Often wearing just a bikini, she aimed her lycée at scenes of unguarded celebrity activity night after night. Moments seared into her mind include the supermodel Janice Dickinson hanging from the rafters as she sang to Miss Jagger. On another night, she found the Machiavellian political operative Roy Cohn slumped over on a couch in a dark corner. Jupiter led the way to her living room. Heaped throughout were portfolios of her Studio 54 photos and clippings of the columns she wrote for adult magazines. She flipped through some favorite shots. Next to the picture were annotations she had scribbled long ago. Debbie Harry caught off guard by her flash in the bathroom line. We were all waiting for the line. For a stall, Jupiter wrote. She's wearing a peach antique dress. Christopher Reeve seated with a pack of Marlboros. I pinched his ass and he turned around and smiled sweetly. Bianca Jagger on the dance floor with Halston. Bianca was at Studio 54 every night. Not always present was Mick, who was bored of going out every night to Studio 54. It's rumored that Studio 54 and her constant need to go out ended their marriage. As the club slid into decline in the 1980s, Jupiter made her exit. I got bored, she said. She had done some modeling on the side, so she decided to start an agency of her own, Judith's Models. We specialized in petite women like me, and I did really well, Jupiter said. 5'2" to 5'6". If they were any taller, they could go to Eileen Ford. They could go to Elite. But if they were petite, there was nowhere for them to go. Eventually, I got into a whole lot of trouble, she added. Her agency thrived into the 1990s with a roster of 80 models and an office on Sutton Place. Then she ran afoul of consumer affairs regulations, promising jobs to prospective models and operating without a license. Her reputation sank. Television news crews staked out her workplace. They couldn't put me in jail for it, Jupiter said, but any time I was in trouble, I ignored it. I'm still the same way. The city finally closed her business in 2004. A New York Post headline read, "Scam Model Agency Shut Down." I'd once made a fortune, but I was always broke by Monday, Jupiter said. I've been rich and I've been poor, even homeless. I was always lousy with money. My friends say I have an impulse control problem. She entered her 70s, and the pandemic hit New York. She lived off unemployment. That's when she started chronicling the city with her phone and posting dispatches to an Instagram account. Her first videos included her chatting up an elderly woman who sipped a margarita alone at a Mexican restaurant. Then she found her subject, Gen Z. I'd become an angry person from everything that happened, she said, but I started feeling like the old Judy again, the one that came to New York all starry-eyed, the girl from Studio 54, except I'd never gone viral before. That evening, Jupiter was hot on the chase for more content. She ambled through Little Italy, studying the tourists in their trattorias. Wait, maybe them, she said, noticing a group of young women. They looked up. Actually, nah, she said, they're nothing special. Outside Sophia's restaurant on Mulberry Street, she was drawn to a slender man wearing a white beret and penny loafers. He was a 28-year-old host, Laturo Posadas. She made her approach. You filmed me a long time ago when you were just starting, he said. Now you're doing well. I'm seeing your videos always. Everyone wants to be a star in New York, I guess. Jupiter had already trained her phone on him. Want to do a spin for me? So you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the New York Times on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Do you have our brand new app? It's free. Download it at the Apple or Google's stores, and it's great to have it on your phone. It's one-touch button operation, really user-friendly. So, who will win next, Netflix or Paramount? Well, we've seen this show before. The tug-of-war for Warner Brothers Discovery echoes on early clash of media titans. Two Hollywood heavyweights going to war over a prize company. Billions of dollars at stake, the future of the media industry hanging in the balance. No, it's not Netflix's quest to acquire Warner Brothers Discovery. It's Summer Redstone's long and painful struggle with Barry Diller to control Paramount 3 decades ago. The outcome reordered the media industry and created a new Hollywood dynasty. That struggle is a neat mirror image of the current contest between Paramount and Netflix for Warner Brothers Discovery, and could be critical to understanding how their story will end and how long it might take. Yes, it is turning into a repeat, Mr. Diller, now chairman of IAC, said in an email. I don't have any advice for the parties other than to be prepared for a long siege. Ours lasted almost 6 months. Now is then the seller in this case, Warner Brothers Discovery, the parent company of the Warner Brothers movie studio, HBO, and CNN, stands accused of running a skewed sales process that benefits one buyer, Netflix, at the expense of shareholders. Now is then the losing bidder, in this case Paramount, and its chief executive David Ellison, is refusing to go away. instead launching a hostile bid to wrest the deal away from the competitor. Mr. Diller played the role of hostile bidder in late 1993. His company, QVC, accused Paramount of handing a favorable deal to Mr. Redstone and Viacom. That move forced Paramount to negotiate a higher price with Viacom, the initial winning bidder. Along with his bid, Mr. Diller sued Paramount, accusing the company of steering the sale in a way that hurt shareholders. A Delaware judge eventually sided with Mr. Diller and ordered Paramount to rerun the sales process and have its shareholders vote on the competing offers. Ultimately, Mr. Redstone prevailed once again. He ruled over an entertainment empire, passing it to his family when he died in 2020. The catch, he paid $9.7 billion, way up from the $7.5 billion initial purchase price. The wrangling took months. Upon receiving the news, Mr. Redstone toasted his guests with champagne at the popular Manhattan restaurant 21. "Here's to us, we won," he said. Actually, the biggest winners, it seems, were Paramount's shareholders, who ended up $2 billion richer. Mr. Ellison, unlike Mr. Diller, hasn't yet decided to take his claims to court. But if he does, that case would probably turn on whether Warner Brothers Discovery violated its duties to shareholders when it selected Netflix as the winning bidder instead of Paramount, said Eric Talley, a professor at Columbia Law School, who specializes in corporate law and governance. That could be difficult to sort out, Mr. Talley said. First of all, Netflix and Paramount bid for different parts of Warner Brothers Discovery, making an apples-to-apples comparison difficult. Netflix wanted the company's streaming and studio businesses, while Paramount wanted the whole company. Because of that, both sides have some wiggle room to argue that one bid was superior. Another major wild card is the question of which bidder, Netflix or Paramount, has a better chance of getting a deal past regulators in the Trump administration. Mr. Ellison has argued that he has a better chance of getting an acquisition across the finish line, and he might, since one of his investors is Jared Kushner, President Trump's son-in-law. But Netflix has made a similar claim, arguing that its deal will receive antitrust approval, partly because tech giants like Google and Facebook make the overall entertainment market incredibly competitive. If Paramount ultimately increases its bid, Warner Brothers Discovery might also argue that signing with Netflix was in the best interest of shareholders because it brought Paramount back to the table for an even higher price, Mr. Talley said. They could say, yeah, we played favorites among bidders here, but we did so in a way that was calculated to try to actually heat up the bidding by the other side rather than put an end to the auction, Mr. Talley said. But even when the dust finally settles, don't expect the bad blood between the two parties to evaporate completely. When Viacom finally succeeded in acquiring Paramount 3 decades ago, Mr. Diller gave a characteristic terse statement to the news media, signaling he was ready to move on. They won, we lost, next. Viacom's side didn't end it there. After the deal, executives at the company began sporting purple sweatshirts that got in one last dig. We won, they lost, next. And one further television note, Jimmy Kimmel's show extended for another year. How about that? ABC staying with Jimmy Kimmel for at least another year and a half. The late-night host informed employees Monday afternoon that Jimmy Kimmel Live had been renewed for another year, extending the show through May of 2027, according to 2 people familiar with his remarks. The renewal comes just a few months after ABC abruptly pulled Mr. Kimmel from the network temporarily because of comments he made about the man accused of killing Charlie Kirk. A top regulator for President Trump had suggested there could be consequences for ABC because of Mr. Kimmel's remarks. The show's suspension quickly morphed into a flashpoint about free speech in America and prompted millions of people to cancel their Disney Plus and Hulu streaming subscriptions. Mr. Kimmel returned to his show 6 days after his suspension and has been in the host chair ever since, resuming his regular barbs against Mr. Trump. The president has returned the favor, and he launched another attack against the host over the weekend. Mr. Kimmel's one-year renewal, however, is notable for how short it is. In the past, Mr. Kimmel has generally signed 3-year extensions. The host for many years now has openly mused about retiring. Additionally, the late-night genre is becoming increasingly endangered. The number of comedic talk shows has winnowed in recent years as ratings and advertising revenue have plunged. In May, CBS will abandon the business altogether when Stephen Colbert's The Late Show goes off the air. George Cheeks, the head of CBS, said this year that he had canceled Mr. Colbert's show because the advertising market was in significant secular decline, and the economics made it challenging for us to keep going. Many people have continued to speculate whether politics also was a factor in Mr. Colbert's cancellation. Bloomberg News reported earlier about Mr. Kimmel's renewal. And a final note, in early November, as Hall's Chop House was heading into the critical holiday season, its president Tommy Hall made a tough call. Prices at his steakhouse chain would go up as the price of beef continues to soar. The price of a popular 8-ounce filet mignon rose to $61 from $57, a ribeye $85 up from $82. Beef prices have been climbing all year, as most of us know, and Hall's found itself in a code red, said Mr. Hall, who heads up Hall's Chop House, which is family-owned and has 5 steakhouses in the Southeast. We had to raise prices or we weren't going to be able to cover costs, he said. Every time we do a price increase, I have butterflies in my stomach, wondering how customers will take it. For steakhouses like Hall's, December is the biggest month of the year. It's when companies rent out private back rooms for lavish parties, corporate expense accounts cover 2 martini lunches, and families treat themselves to a night of steaks, bottles of Cabernet Sauvignon, sides of cream spinach, truffle mac and cheese, and au gratin potatoes. But this holiday season, many steakhouses, from fine dining restaurants to mid-price chains like Texas Roadhouse and Longhorn Steakhouse, are walking a tightrope. They have to balance raising menu prices enough to cover at least some of their expenses, but not so much that consumers stop walking through their doors. With the nation's cattle inventory at its lowest level since the 50s, ground beef, chuck roasts, and steaks have surged in price over the last 2 years. Restaurants that specialize in steak are feeling the same sticker shock as consumers in grocery stores, as the price of USDA choice boneless steak has soared 20% in the past year to an average of $14.13 a pound, according to September data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Some customers who've been reliable beef eaters have made some changes. Now they're sometimes getting the chicken or the pork chops. They're limiting their steak purchases a little bit. Still, on an early December weekday at Hall's Chop House in Charleston, South Carolina, as Mr. Hall prepared for the dinner crowd, he said all 5 of his restaurants were fully booked through the holiday season. People are still buying the more expensive cuts, the bone-in filet, the tomahawk steak, the Kansas City strip steak, he said. The volume of those cuts has been holding steady. As for what happens next year, that's tougher to predict. I'm not so nervous about December, Mr. Hall said, but I'm extremely nervous about January and February. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the December 10th issue of the New York Times. Your reader has been Chuck Stevens. Thank you for listening.